everybody. And yes, I do apologize that I'm not at all in sort of the right setting here with this very colorful background. I realize I should be presenting a much more serious side for the session as we are gathered here for this very serious topic about telling stories in cultural and heritage sites. But fortunately for you, you will not be really hearing from me much at all this evening, but we have assembled a wonderful panel of 4 people who bring masses of experience despite their very youthful looks. Did I say that correctly? Okay, ladies, I'll collect my 10 bucks afterwards. In this particular area, but in very different aspects. So we're looking to hear from their own experience and perspectives as we go through the panel. And just say very briefly, on my immediately next to me, we have Joe Henwood, who is in Sydney and is a tour guide and museum educator and comes very much from the storyteller aspect of this evening. Annabelle straddles both because she is a storyteller and an archaeologist, and she works full-time at the Ambrosetti, if I said that correctly, Ethnographic Museum in Buenos Aires. So it must be very early in the morning for you, is it, Annabelle? I think so, yes?
Yeah, 8 in the morning, not so early.
Not so bad. Okay, very good, great. And so she kind of works on both sides. Sui Yen, here in Singapore, is a storyteller and for her sins is the current president of the Storytelling Association of Singapore, and ever since 2016 has been very active in running programs in both museums and art galleries here. And those of us who are storytellers are very grateful because she gives us work every now and again. So I hope I said that nicely, Sui Yen. And finally, we go Anna Salman, who was here in Singapore and ran a very interesting space called Playum, which enabled her to follow her interest, particularly in education and play, and where she certainly did bring in storytelling, and a number of us worked on a wonderful project there. But she really comes from the other side because she is someone who would be commissioning storytellers to come and work on a project. So that's given you, I hope you can see that we've got 4 people who actually know what they're talking about, unlike myself. So Joe, let me ask you to kick us off and tell us, what was the moment that you first kind of realized that storytelling in a cultural or heritage connection was the thing for you?
It's the other way around. It's my origin story, if you like, is my life as a superhero, because I was working as a guide in a historic house, and as part of the performance management review, they said, so can you think of any training that you could do that would make you better at communicating with visitors? And I went, storytelling? So then I had to find out what storytelling was and who could teach me, and that there was a guild, and it was so interesting, and the whole idea was fascinating. And then when they said, oh, we're having a festival, we need to come up with something for children. I said, oh, pick me, I can do storytelling. And so it goes on. That is history.
Yep, once upon a time. Thank you very much, Joe. Great. Annabelle, how about you? And please, I know you're bilingual, but if you could confine yourself to English today rather than Spanish.
I will. One of the things that, well, it's very similar to Joe in a sense. I had been paying attention to the storytelling scene here, and I was working in heritage. At that time, I was working in the city of Buenos Aires as a guide for the city in heritage places. And one of the things that I started doing was tell stories in places, placemaking, what we call it. And this kind of thing happened again in the museum, at the Ethnographic Museum, which is here. Hello. And in this place, I started telling guided tours, and well, I was doing all types of activities. And at one point, I asked, why would not tell stories? We were having two Maori carvings from New Zealand, which no one paid attention to. And I knew stories from the Maori people. And I said, well, but, this popo is pulling its tongue out. Why not to tell a story that cast this? And that opened a door because people started staying for the stories, and well, that's a whole new story.
Yeah. I'm sure they just wanted to see you sticking your tongue out. That's why they came.
For sure.
Fantastic. Anna.
I think the moment for me was when I was doing voluntary work at the Victoria and Albert Museum, but in the wrong department. I was in the sculpture collection in 1993, and I didn't even know that museum education departments existed. But in this glorious National Museum, they had a very good education department, and it was really a sun coming out of the clouds moment for me to realize that you could use the arts and the permutations within the arts as a form of enhancing the collections and engaging people with it. And I was right there. So the moment that I realized that existed, I just set my sights on that trajectory. And then 3 years later, by the time I got the right kind of experience and a master's under my belt, I worked at Reading Museum Service, which is about 30 miles from London, and was able to then start commissioning storytellers for the first time, which was really, such an honor, and I haven't really looked back.
Wonderful. Okay. I don't know if we've got anybody joining us from UK, but if we have, I'm sure you're going to get people writing into you immediately and saying, oh, I live near Reading. Sui Yen.
Yeah, I started off as a storyteller for children in schools. And I think my very first time was when somebody from the Urban Development Center contacted me to do storytelling with the kind of things they had there and to educate children about urban development. And I thought, oh, wow, what a big topic. And so I started there. And then the next thing I moved on to was somebody brought me to the Malay Heritage Center, and then I just have the pictures here. And they say, here, these are the artifacts there. Can you think of a story, make up a story, and to engage children so that they will be interested in the artifacts here. Now, these are not the real actual artifacts. I can't produce them here because they're copyrighted. So I kind of represented them. There was the anvil, there was the costume, there was the necklace, the golden necklace, and a wicker basket. There were pictures of people in the profession, in their special profession long ago, and that's a barber, a street barber actually. So all these things were there in that room, and then I had to tell the story about these artifacts. So that's how I got started, and it was a very interesting journey, and I began to enjoy it and love it.
Sure. What I'm hearing, I mean, there's just a very wide range of experiences. So let me throw this question out to you, and it's really, whoever's got an idea, or I can see Joe here being the rest of you are going to really have to compete because Joe has a very buoyant right hand. When we say, what is a heritage or a cultural site? I mean, we've spoken, a couple of you have mentioned museums, but what could that be for the purpose of our discussion this evening? Yes, Annabelle.
Well, I would say that anything that has significance, because anything can be a heritage site. I think, for instance, in the city of Buenos Aires, you don't only see the architecture or the archaeological heritage and go inside the museum. There's also placemaking in the sense of what can we find when we go to a square, people dancing tango. And this is heritage too, this practice, this cultural practice. Not only is a tourist feature, but it's something that is a part of the culture. So sometimes we highlight this, we put a focus on this, and then it becomes heritage in terms of part of an identity, part of a practice that has gone on or is linked to certain parts of history or certain neighborhoods. And museums at first, well, they were places that held collections of curiosities. But nowadays, I think what they are doing is highlighting the community links, the stories that are told inside, of course, and again they bring us to a way of seeing ourselves, even when things that are shown are in the past, because that also puts us face to face to that which is now and that which was then. But it's still part of us, or it's still part of our complexity.
Sure.
But that's how I would perhaps define this, which is quite complex.
Very nice. Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, I mean, it was really just to echo what Annabelle said, because I believe there's a new definition that's kind of trickling down from academia about heritage, which is that it's things that have meaning. So that allows one to take in intangible heritage as well as heritage, sort of tangible heritage, which is exactly what Annabelle was talking about. And for me, extrapolating that into cultural institutions as well, it's about content. And I think that we will be talking, I'm sure, about how storytelling has such a place in enhancing content or engaging people with content.
Yeah. Folk tales can also be part of intangible heritage. And I think that there was, at some point, quite recently, they were talking about some Singapore folk tales as being something that they should send to UNESCO to get that kind of stamp of this is part of our heritage, Yeah, Jo.
I moving expanding on from that, you've got, yes, the material culture, the built culture, the buildings, the objects and so on, the things that a museum can hold. You've got the intangible culture, but you've also got living heritage, so that you can include the rivers, the harbour, the bushland, the desert, or the community spaces as well, that they are all places that are significant because human beings are in relationship to them. We are heirs to them, we are custodians of all the places, and therefore the way that we create a bridge between whatever it is and our experience, what we carry around with us, is our connection to that. That makes it cultural, that makes it human, that binds us together as a community, and that's what makes it significant.
Yeah. Could you just give me some examples of non-formal spaces that you've perhaps told in?
Well, I mean, you can tell I've been in the Royal Botanic Garden, Sydney. I've been on beaches. There are on bushland you can do as walking tours. You've got Taronga Zoo. One of my best jobs was as a dinosaur keeper, there are plenty of stories to tell with that. But certainly gardens and community gardens that are created out of remediated bushland. The streets on which bushrangers used to be, but they're built up now, and there's nothing left of that except the memory.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, can I add something to that?
Please, Vienne.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. I thought also I was thinking along the same line about natural heritage, and that's the biodiversity, the flora and fauna, which is so important. Is part of our cultural heritage.
Yeah. Though also too, I mean, what you were just saying there, Jo, really struck a chord with me, because here in Singapore we are developing so fast that anything that's more than 40 years old is ancient and is likely to be knocked down. And so the idea you talk about walking where the bushrangers had walked, but all those places where our forefathers walked have all really, gone under concrete and have disappeared. So there's certainly a place there. Annabelle, I think you picked Jo to that one. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to add something that to what Jo and Sui Yin are saying, that even the skies are heritage in terms of doing, astronomy storytelling, or a tour linked to certain moments in which the stars are there and are linked to either rituals, celebrations, dates, or cooking. Food is heritage. So, well, I enjoy food, evidently, but anything can be heritage and appreciated and celebrated because it's part of what links us as communities. So that's what I wanted to add.
Sure. Yeah, Joe.
No, I'm just talking about like the riverways and so on. So when you're telling stories about, you can use or create stories about the animals, the plants, the insects, and all that sort of thing, and that makes that place are connected to the human beings who are part of that story, because we are people of place, regardless of cultural heritage, our own individual heritage, that we belong to a place or places. And that gives us that we are creating stories in those places, or we are seeing the stories that already exist and seeing how they can create a bridge between, the natural environment or whatever else is there.
Sure.
Yeah, I like to build upon that.
Yeah.
because presently Mindy is here, and she's been involved in this natural heritage site, and it's one of our end parks, and it's a Jurong end park, which is very at first I thought it was rather particular of them, because any stories that we craft has to do with the animals, the flora and fauna in that site, and it cannot be outside. So you can't have a bear there. And you couldn't have even some of our animals that can be found in other parts of Singapore, but not in Jurong. But having said that, after months and months of storytelling to the audience grew, and I think more young people are flocked to that particular park. So like you said, the link, the building the bridge between people and this site, through storytelling really helped in that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because that's exactly where I wanted to go. In terms of, Anna, what you said, you were talking about content. So speaking to you, as someone who wants to bring in storytellers, what is it about, stories or storytelling that you feel makes it such a useful tool?
I don't need to persuade everyone here just how vivid and engaging and arresting and immediate stories can be. I mean, they really are in the moment with storytelling. But I think on a deeper level, when it comes to museums, for me, storytelling has a real function if it's done respectfully and in accordance to the space in which it's taking place. So it's exactly as Swee Yin was talking about with Jurong. It's the sense, if it can attach you to the sense of place, then not only are you receiving the primary enjoyment of listening to the story and everything that goes with it and the journey in your mind that it takes you to, but you're also engaging with the collections or the themes that are being represented in that space, which is why that story is being told. So it's sort of doubly rich, if you like. And I feel strongly that it does need to do that. I absolutely understand the commissioners of the Jurong M Park, because that's what you ultimately want. You want that space to be enhanced for people. And in this context, storytelling is a vehicle or a very, very rich interpretative methodology to engage people with that ultimate content.
You see, Roger, the thing is that storytellers and tour guides are miracle workers, because we can make the blind see. And people who don't see the world around them and don't see the objects and don't see the buildings or the plants or anything, by creating stories, magic.
Yeah.
And also, in a sense, we try to bring the sense of wonderment back into these places. which sometimes are so common in the terms of, oh, I walk through this every day, oh, I didn't notice that. We put a focus or a highlight on that. But at the same time, for many people, at least here, we bring back the sense of wonderment of listening to a story, which is something that not everyone thinks that can happen inside, for instance, a museum. So, it's like, oh no, museums are solemn. As Anna was saying, this definition, these concepts have been changing. But for a long time, these were sacred temples in which you could not even sneeze, less tell a story. So that's also important to bring back.
Yeah. And I think particularly, in terms of, so often in the museum experience, you are distanced from that object, and you are just there. Your relationship with it is as the observer, and the head's back, and kind of doing this. Whereas when we tell a story, there's an emotional relationship to it. There's a context, and suddenly we understand what is the purpose, what makes this special, what was the meaning then behind it. Yes, so yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying that every time, the last time I met Jo, she had this thing about what storytellers are, and I'm collecting all these phrases, and today it's a magician. The last time she mentioned liberator, so I just look for all these things, and I thought we invoke the muse, we summon the creative energy that is in the visitor, our audience, and everyone is creative, but sometimes you throw them this artifact, you throw them this art piece, and without knowledge, without understanding, it's just a dead thing, right?
Yeah.
So really, the storyteller is drawing out that creative energy from the visitor, is building the bridge, connecting people through time and across cultures, and also a liberator. And this is going by Jo, to set people free. Yeah. And I see that a lot when I see the visitors coming and looking at that thing, confused or well, blank, and then after that smiling and seeing some meaning in that the cultural piece. Yeah.
I remember seeing a First Nation storyteller from Canada, and he had his mask and he had his wings as the raven, and during the story, and he was telling how he had been given these by his father, and was telling the story about the first time that he actually put these on. And of course it was nighttime, and you're getting a sense of, wow, this, instead of being in a safe library and he's on a stage and all that kind of thing, it's dark and you're surrounded by the big, I'm not sure if totem poles is probably not the right term, and when he put this on, his arms, his wings suddenly became enormous and stretched out over us. It was just a breathtaking moment, and you were transported from the safety of downtown Badok to the heart of his village on a kind of all this moonlit night kind of thing. It was just astonishing. But I wanted then to pick up on something that what you just said, Anna, about speaking respectfully and in accordance with the space. And so, what are the issues between perhaps being a good storyteller and also perhaps the concerns of the museum, or in Sui Yen's case of the park, that you can't introduce the bear and whatever into your story? How do you is there a clash? How do you reconcile perhaps two conflicting perspectives?
I mean, I should say I don't want to denigrate the idea of having a positive experience in a museum or a cultural space in and of itself, because that's very useful for museums. And we've also, Annabelle touched on the idea it can make people feel more relaxed and comfortable in that space and provide good memories generally. But I think that storytelling can do more than that, as we've been talking about. It can not only give you positive experience, but also engage you with the content in that space. And so in answer to your question, for me, I focus on that. I focus on how, not accurately, but how much of a connection the storyteller have with the space in which they sit or stand, because otherwise they might as well be in a shopping centre or in a random park. And so there has to be a purpose for them being there, and something that creates deep connections. So for me, the issue would be if that didn't happen.
Right.
Even though I've just said, the very worst thing that can happen is people have a nice time, and that's great. But I do believe there's more that storytelling can do in the heritage spaces.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But I think we can get into this idea that museums or heritage sites are sort of, colonial era Victorian lugubrious places, and that is definitely not a 21st century museum or heritage site. It is about engagement, it is about collection. These are the objects that the people, the community, wants kept because they are telling a truth. And it is a joy. It is the easiest thing in the world to tell stories in a heritage site for that reason, because you're not creating things out of imagination in a sterile environment. Everything around you already has meaning and beauty, and it's just for us to open the box and to allow people, that genie to emerge so that people can see what's there. And the sort of things that are going on in museum education and public programs are about that community building and using storytelling for preschoolers, for school-age children, for adolescents, for families, and therapeutically to use it as a peaceful place or a challenging, confronting place. And these are the values that we have, that education is not about learning dot points for memorization for an exam. Education is about learning, which is the greatest adventure of all. And we are the ones who can say, see, this is the path. This is where you can go, just through a story.
I'd like to add to that. No, because I like the word that Annabelle mentioned about the respect. And I think every museum or every cultural heritage site has their goal, their purpose. I just collected some of the things that I've done, and I presently I'm working with National Gallery, and they want to present children's stories that are educational and safe. So they have their definition about safe, and it was interesting for me and some of our storytellers working with them. What is safe is, well, no death. And we would think, folk tales, it's, children should be all right, but no death. They want to stay safe. So I have to respect that, that they want that kind of thing. And the stories need to have educational value so that the kids leave with something they learn about character, for example. Yeah. So like animal stories, like I have worked, WWF one time wanted us to tell some animal stories, but the animals must be portrayed positively. So, and most folk tales, that was a problem. A lot of folk tales portrayed tigers in a negative way. They said no. So yeah, so there's all these places, and like I mentioned, Jurong insisted on only flora and fauna in that area. So that's when we are working with them, we have to respect, the kind of goals, the kind of purpose that they have for their cultural heritage.
Yes, Annabelle, you wanted to chip in there.
Yes. One thing that I wanted to point out is that it also depends on what's our role in the museum as storytellers and what kind of storytelling we are doing inside. Because one thing is to do a storytelling session, open, perhaps linked to the theme or the subject that the museum has. And one other thing is when the museum asks us to do a storytelling, perhaps, to tell a story, a folk tale or a myth that is linked to something in the exhibition. So those kinds of things, of course, makes us change our way of telling and our way of working with the people. So for instance, this is in the Museum of Modern Art here in Buenos Aires. And in this exhibition, they wanted us more to play with the kids and do a game with them and work with observation of the works of art. So what we were doing is I was introducing through storytelling the bio of the author, a woman that is 101 years old right now. And I was telling them about her and about her childhood. And some of the paintings were linked to a circus. So we entered one of the circus tents, and that opened the door to a world in which the kids were interpreting what they were seeing in the pictures. And so that was a game which the museum authorized. And I was actually using the storytelling structure to structure what the kids were saying. So I was like asking them, okay, what comes next? And what do you see here? And what is this character doing and why? And, you know, bringing points of conflict or, you know, the closure. And that's one way of doing storytelling inside. But then you have some other museums that could change that. You know, they could ask you, no, what we want is something different. What we want is to speak about the heritage inside this display case. So in that case, you know, I go to, I was trying to look for a picture in particular, but not right now, well, things that happen. But I would try to, for instance, here in the Museum of Fine Arts, they were saying, okay, we have this pre-Columbian exhibition, kids are not looking at it. Okay, so we're going to tell a story, and one detail of the story is linked to the objects inside the exhibition. So we tell the kids go and look for the details, and then they come back. And that's one other kind of story in which you are linking it to educational practice in the museum. Or are you just doing a simple session? So it always depends. But yeah, I see Anna wants to say something and I want to hear her.
Yeah, Anna.
I just think you've tapped into an enormous, a very rich vein here. And this notion of how educational does storytelling need to be within the cultural space. And I'm a strong believer in each individual person in any heritage or cultural space having their own personal encounters with the content. But I think, so I'm not a fan of heavy educational telling the storyteller, which I wouldn't dream of doing, but some people do, tell the storyteller that they need to include certain educational nuggets within their stories. But I understand it. But I think for me, the central focus is about engaging. It's an overworn word, engaging. It is in the UK anyway. But nevertheless, it's useful. It's about engaging people with that object, and then it's up to them. So for me, I would like the storyteller to draw attention and engage them in their way, because they're the professional and they're the ones doing the work, and then people have a renewed or new engagement with that object. For me, that's all.
See, if you're a storyteller, you can take that, you can be creative if they give you the room. So there's in a suburban museum, a regional museum that's got me going there, and they're just wanting to have a different sort of performance on their monthly thing for the kids, and it happens to be at Halloween. And so they're saying ghost stories, but Joe, make the ghost stories connect to the local environment. So think about the local historical figures here that we want to get the kids there. So easy peasy, right? I mean, writing 10 historical stories and taking these events and turning them into ghost stories without, of course, terrifying the children in any way, because goodness knows we don't want our children scared by ghost stories on Halloween. So easy done. Go for it, Joe. Of course. No trouble, Anne.
What happens? Have you ever had that issue? I know, Annabelle, you shared that story of how a storyteller made a mistake in the story, and there were a couple of members of the audience who, for whatever reason, were able to pick that out, something about a spear, I believe.
Yes. Besides being an educator and a storyteller, I also produce storytelling sessions in the museum. It's been going on for more than 10 years. And we have had lots of storytellers. And one of the main objectives there was that they bring folk tales to the museum. Most, in Buenos Aires at least, most storytellers do literary tales and not folk tales. Folk tales are like, the little sister, the little brother, they don't pay attention to. So inside the museum, we were like a bastion of folk tales and myths and legends and, that enjoyment of that kind of heritage also. But there are different ways of telling and different ways of relating to the stories and different ways of researching. And some people just tell what they have, or they have concepts that are different to what the museum is telling. And we had a storyteller telling a wonderful story, but she was speaking about one cultural object that was, she changed it. Instead of a harpoon, she was speaking about a spear. And it might not be noticeable for most of the people in the audience enjoying the story, but there were two people that afterwards they came to me, they knew that I was the organizer, and they said, how can she be speaking about a spear and not a harpoon? And they were not First Nation people. One of them was an expert, and the other one, well, I'm not sure, it was an aficionado to the storytelling. And in those cases, what we do is we are bringing an artistic voice. They are not experts, they are artists. So we opened up that door and we said, okay, so if you want to listen to some stories that are, point by point, perhaps come to the storytelling sessions that I do, because I make sure that I have that responsibility being from the museum. But not all storytellers have that knowledge or that content. At the same time, bringing them to the museum was a way to stimulate them learning more about folktales, myths, and legends, and seeing them as something to be respected, which at the beginning of these did not happen. At first, I brought only storytellers that did folktales, but through the years, I opened it up to more and different ways of approaching this. So yeah, that the museum trusts me in a sense, so they accepted what I said. Okay, it's the same as if we bring a musician or someone from other kinds of artistic language, and they might speak in the past about certain indigenous groups, and I would be at the back saying, no, they are still living, don't say that. Now what I do is before the session, I speak with them. But at the same time, what happens during storytelling, they are there. They are at the front.
Sorry, I'm going to leap in. I think it is a good point that the storyteller should be aware of the responsibility they have in a space which is traditionally associated with factual information. And I've also had problems encounters as a commissioner, where a storyteller was talking about, telling a wonderful story about a turtle, and the turtle hid its head inside its shell, which is anatomically impossible. And it's a tortoise that can do that, by the way. And she was sort of holding this turtle shell at the time. And so I was at the back and going, oh. And I think in a way one needs a disclaimer. I mean, I know it sounds a bit, I don't know, it's not brilliant, it's not the solution, but I feel people do need to know whether or not it's factually correct or not when it comes to subjects of science, but also particularly culture and identity, because that's a very sensitive and important area, and they need to be responsible and aware of that, I think.
I think that's one of the things, sorry, Joe, that we've certainly been trying to do here through Feast. We've had a number of sessions where we've talked about cultural appropriation, or where we've encouraged members. And one of the great advantages, I think, of Feast as an organization is that, if you're telling a Korean story, we have Korean members that you can speak to and find out, is this, or how do I pronounce this, or what would be the appropriate thing to say? So those resources, are here within the organisation, and it's really important that we do start taking that responsibility seriously. Yeah, sorry, Joe. I could see you making faces earlier when.
I always do, but what I was just thinking about was that it's about being true, being what it says on the label. So if you say, this is an artwork and I'm going to tell you a story about what this could have been, and it isn't what the artist intended, and it's got nothing to do with it, and it's imagination, but people go, this is just a story, it's imagination. Or somebody goes in and goes, wow, I think this is, and they go off, and you say, okay, this is somebody just making it up. But if you don't say that, there is an assumption that you are interpreting some kind of truth, again, quotation marks, or at least as much as we can ever know of the truth. And we are going to share that in a creative way, but it's going to be, you can trust what I say. I'm not going to lead you up the garden path. I'm going to have truth dressed in story. And as long as you know which way what you're presenting, and you know what you're listening to and taking in, it's fine.
Yeah.
I agree with Joe. I almost made the mistake. There was this painting that I was given at the National Gallery, and they look like tropical plants, right? And I thought, just tell an Asian story. But if I did, and then I went into the research and researched deeply. It is painted by a Vietnamese painter, and it's on lacquer, and it's a well-known traditional artwork by a famous Vietnamese painter. So there again, should I tell my, I can't remember, was it Indonesian folktale, or should I look for a Vietnamese one? Yeah, and so I think, realizing that appropriately, I would like to help people to understand the painter, the lacquer work. So I need to do research, and unfortunately, I did find a Vietnamese folktale. Looking at the landscape by this a Vietnamese artist, discovering more about it, and then having personal connection with it by researching, okay, what is lacquer? I don't know what lacquer painting. I have no experience with it. So I needed to find out more. And as I delved more into it, and then to read more about, Vietnamese folktales, I didn't know any. So I had to check up, find my Vietnamese friend and say, hey, you know of any folktales around? And she educated me, telling me here and there, this. And soon I found something that could help to bring out this story, or rather highlight this particular artwork.
It's a great mindset to have. Thanks, Leanne. We've talked about truth. We're living in a time, exactly, when we are reassessing ourselves. And indeed, the whole issue of what museums have and how they acquired them, and should things be returned to their original owners. And we're joking when we met a few weeks ago to talk about this, that not just being storytellers, but statue topplers. This idea that, the museum may have, this is the narrative that it has always told about this particular culture or artifact or whatever. And so what is our role there as perhaps a storyteller who wants to share a new narrative or a different narrative? And maybe the museum is not the place to do it. You would find other spaces to try and share that narrative. Oh, thank you, Joe. I just love your face. And immediately I know that you're not agreeing with me. So come on. You're all being far too polite at the moment. We want to stir things up.
That the museum is always the place to tell the story. That I was brought up that a museum is a safe place for dangerous ideas. And the idea is that you don't tell, and I think what history and history making and history sharing and history ownership is leading towards or open towards is that there is never one story. And if we can create multiple stories and multiple points of view so that I have a reverence for heritage. I don't want to topple the statues, but I want to have, right, that is an object that cannot change, but the stories that we tell from it certainly can. And we can have different storytellers with multiple perspectives. And multiple perspectives, that's the facets on the diamond. That's what makes things sparkle and bring light to us all.
Well, I'm a little bit of a statue toppler. I must confess. I work at a museum that is linked to colonial practices. So, it's impossible not to think of decolonization and what is the weight of responsibility that we have, even if we are contemporary workers at the museum and we're not linked to the first museum, the first people that built that museum. And in particular, I work inside the museum, so I'm not just a storyteller guest. So I have a little bit more freedom in terms of what I say. And I have a little bit more freedom also in terms of what the authorities allow me to say and allow me to put in contention, in contradiction. And at the same time, we are filled with heritage that is noisy in terms of how museums are seen nowadays. So, I just show you a picture of a place in which I tell stories. And in here we have the Maori popo, but I also have right next to me a butsudan, a Japanese Buddhist altar, which was something that the museum bought and is inside the museum. But at the same time, it's a religious object. What is going on here? We have clay masks depicting races, because at that time ethnography was doing classification. What we do is speak about it. And what we do is we usually speak about it since or from a critical sense, a critical point of view, especially because most people are not aware. And that's the statue toppling from the museum. At the same time, when the museum policy doesn't agree with us, well, we might speak against the museum authorities in a very subtle way, because we are part of it and we agree that we are a team, but we might say, okay, this is my point of view, this is the museum's point of view, for instance. Yeah. But as storytellers, as Joe said, anything can be told inside. What we, for instance, I don't agree, and I try to pay attention to what guests we have when we have storytellers is I won't bring storytellers that enhance the whiteness of the country. I will not bring storytellers that speak about indigenous people as primitive or something from the past or remains or exotic, but that's my choice as a programmer. And in a sense, that's also the choice of the museum of what we are doing. But again, whether you're inside or outside of the place, of course, there is quite a difference.
Sure. Yeah. Yes, Anna.
I mean, I suppose all I've got is the UK perspective. Museums and the UK museology is all for statue toppling. It's more the government that's preventing the museum sector at the moment from fully toppling statues. But what museums here want to do is tell the stories about them. So with a particularly contentious statue in Bristol, which is of a man related to the slave trade, it was toppled, and some people wanted it just simply removed, kind of Eastern European style. Like, get rid of that person, we don't need it in our history. What the museum sector wanted was to tell that story so that we didn't lose that history and so we could learn from it. So obviously it's a complicated area, but where storytellers can contribute is in telling those stories, I think. But it does put quite a responsibility on them for quite a hot topic.
Sure. Yeah.
And I was also musing, in this country, we talk about contested histories. when actually arguably they're just history. It's just history, you know. It's just we haven't really talked about it yet or explored it. And I think it would be quite healthy and helpful to think of it as history rather than contested history, and that storytellers can do that too.
Unfortunately, history is often the winner's point of view. And so what's contesting is that losers are now finally getting their voice and being given a chance to kind of speak up, you know, and share that, isn't it? So, as you say, as the world becomes more colorful and societies become more mixed, when we are, you know, getting a chance to have our voices, you know, I mean, it's good, like, you know, in our parliament here, we mandate that minorities must be represented, because otherwise we have such a racial imbalance here in Singapore. If we didn't do that and people voted on racial lines, then those stories would never, those perspectives would never be heard. So it is really important, I think, that storytellers, we have that opportunity to tell those stories, provided, of course, that the museums are open and interested to share them. So I'm sure there must be some of our members here who are thinking, well, you know, how do I get my local museum or gallery interested in bringing me or to have storytelling in the museum or whatever the site as part of its programming? Have you got any tips on that, suggestions? No, they haven't. Sorry, everybody listening. They're absolute dead lost. Don't know why we invited them here. Yes, Annabelle.
Well, here, one of the things is that whether these experiences are happening in museums that are close to that museum, you know, because, for instance, we have been doing storytelling besides bringing guests. We have been doing storytelling at the Ethnographic Museum for more than 15 years. So in some encounters of educators or museums, we were sharing this experience, and suddenly you know, I'm coaching educators in the other museums saying, okay, what can you do with storytelling? You as an educator, or how can you do to bring storytellers to the museum? So some museums nowadays are thinking of storytelling programs, sometimes inviting me, but sometimes inviting other people or the staff at the museum working on it. So one thing is to train staff, giving them some techniques, working with them, accompanying them, but also being part of the staff. On the other hand, museums can be great venues for festivals, for instance. So you can try to, you know, if the museum is open to other cultural practices inside the museum, you know, artistic languages, you might be asking the museum, okay, may we do this part of the festival here? And if the museum likes it or likes the response of the people, they might, you know, if they are interested in opening up or having more audiences or bringing diversity in terms of who comes to the museum, well, they might be interested afterwards in accepting a storytelling program. But mostly is, for me, it's little steps. Be very patient. You know, the statue toppling came at the end. I started timidly, you know, very little steps. I was doing a storytelling session mixed with a guided tour for kids, and then grown-ups started standing there and staying there. And my supervisor said, hey, this is interesting. Okay, let's try it for grown-ups. And hey, this is interesting. And let's try it for... So be patient, because museums, or in the case of museums specifically, you know, they have long times, you know, almost archaeological times, not paleontological, but archaeological, long times. But that might help, you know, to and sometimes there are authorities that are not interested, and what you have to do is wait until they change. Yeah.
Authority toppling. Okay, well, that's another direction altogether. It's true that we had the 398.2 at the Asian Civilization Museum several years ago. It was a Sunday, and they were really astonished at how many people came in. And as you say, again, very much families, which they were really happy to see. But also, I think that they were quite surprised at a couple of the spaces that we used. That they hadn't. They have, you know, a big kind of rectangular, almost like a lobby on the second floor, and to see that being used, they hadn't really thought that was a possible place, because acoustically it is quite challenging. So you know, again, I think that's one of the things that you can do if you offer to do a festival and you can get them to give you certain spaces. It opens their minds to, oh, there's a potential here. Or if you can, in your scheduling, demonstrate some of the different approaches that we've been talking about in this session, in the way that you interact with the exhibits, the artifacts. This is all another way that you teach them. I'll come to Anna first.
I think, sorry to bring down the tone of the conversation, but I think money is something else that needs to be considered, because as a commissioner, I mean, storytellers in the UK are quite expensive, and I totally get that, because the skills and the experience required to be a good storyteller, and all these sensitivities and responsibilities and content awareness that they have to bring to the space that we've been talking about for the last hour, that takes a good person, and rightly they charge for that. And so it's for me, it's not so much the issue of the culture of the museum and how traditional it is or how resistant it might be to that form of programming. It's more about money, because you're throwing a bit of budget at it. Having said that, it is always beautifully successful and so impactful. So I think it's worth it, I hasten to say.
Yeah.
I'm glad you feel that way, Anna.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I am a person without power. You know, I'm there, you know, and not making decisions. So I'm nibble, because I'm a heritage buff. When I travel anywhere, you remember the old days, you used to be able to visit, you know, you used to be able to leave your city. It was so good. Anyway, in those days, if I go to a museum or an art gallery or so on, I will always say to somebody at the desk, so do you ever have storytelling here? You know, have you thought about it? Or if I go to a library, do you have storytellers? I could do storytelling for you. Do you have somebody who organizes things? Because I could do. And one, like last September in History Week, I was delivering a talk on history, and therefore I was going around the neighbourhood seeing places. So I went in and I was with the education officer at the art gallery, and they're sort of saying, storytelling, what do you have books? And, you know, so you have to explain what it is and how it works, and I don't really know what you're talking about, you know. So I'm sort of saying, so I could do a multi-perspective, a multi-strand story linking up the themes within characters within those paintings there. I could do one about the artist. You've got a sculpture garden there. So I'm not sure. So I had to sort of create the program to make her see what the program could be. And by doing that, as I'm going around, I'm sort of saying, so tell me about what the intention was, and, you know, all this else, so that I'm teaching her what storytelling can do and getting her more excited, and got a gig. Happy ever after.
I like to add to that. I think because we are in a new technology age now, and especially with pandemic, I think there are lots of techno use, and I certainly feel that making videos of ourselves, telling stories, using artifacts, I think that's very effective in promoting this to museums, officers. I recently, I think, because I you know, making videos, I make some of them, and I always complain because they take such a long time to make, and to make good ones, right? But I'm thankful I did them, and I put it up on social media, and one of the museums here got to see it, and was interested in doing storytelling with senior citizens. So
Yes.
so yeah, so I do think that's one way, you know, we can so-called educate museum officers because they do need some education at times. I think that I think in Britain, I think the museum officers or curators are more open-minded or receptive about storytelling. But I think certainly in Singapore, it's not so much yet. Yeah, and even in my experience with working at the few museums here and this matter of education and yet being imaginative and in the storytelling, I had to persuade. Like I told you about the knife incident. It was a story about pirates in old days, and certainly they carry weapons. So I mentioned the weapon, the story, and adult, somebody up there and said, oh, no, that's not good. But then amongst the adults, their children watched it and they said, oh, I studied that about that story in my history class and my social studies. And I go, yeah. So you see, maybe we can present it in a different way when we tell this story that I think just the parents be aware with the younger children around, because they were so concerned about death and a knife and all that. So I think they were getting educated themselves, and slowly. I was upset at first, such a small little thing, but I think diplomatically and slowly they got to accept certain things about storytelling to be more open-minded.
Yeah. If I could just add on there, this particularly in terms of what you're saying, in terms of the pre-recorded video, one possible aspect too would be to do the kind of audio described kind of presentation for vision impaired. I've been approached by a couple of museums that are keen to have these kind of tours to enable the blind to access their collection. And I think it's something that storytellers, we have good voices. We're probably quite good at describing things. One of the reasons why I became involved, I got trained as an audio describer, is because I think I hope it is improving my skills as a storyteller in order to be able to convey clearly and concisely what is happening in a scene. So that may be another option, a kind of very targeted market in order to try and create that story. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Annabelle, yes, okay, yes, all right, quickly.
Thank you. Now, two things that I wanted to add. I think Anna brought something very important in terms of budgeting. Not all museums, for instance, here, my museum at least doesn't pay storytellers. What we do is have like an envelope or, like similar to busking, but people know that this is like a voluntary contribution. But we have developed a speech and we have taught our audiences what is appropriate or not to pay to the storytellers. And at the same time, they have the freedom that if they want to come, the whole contingent of family, or they don't have too much money that day, they can come at another time. And that was the only deal that I could get from the authorities of the museum, because they said, no, we are not paying. And the storytellers, in this case, they said, we are interested and we accept. But some other projects we have done getting outside financing and opening or offering the project to the museum. It's all paid, it's all covered. So you can just hire us and hire the project. And at the same time, one other thing that I did not want to forget is that if you are telling in a museum or you're thinking of that, also check out what are the conditions in terms of conservation, lighting, the use of space, the drinking of water inside the exhibition, because those are also things that matter to museum people. If you're telling and suddenly you do this and you hit a painting, yeah, no, don't do that. So that kind of thing is also important for you to, oh, don't worry, I'm going to treat your child properly. It's your child, the museum, for some people in the museum. So take that into account also if you're thinking of telling inside, that's fundamental.
That's wonderful, actually, Annabelle, because I think this was a kind of last question before I then want to at least throw it open to our audience today. And that is, what are the differences between performing inside a museum, possibly in a relatively confined space, and performing, telling a story outdoors in a garden or at the zoo or walking along the street outside the fish market or something. So, yeah, what do you see as the differences, the challenges in either space? Gosh, Joe is quiet. I don't believe I've actually managed to take the words out of Joe. Wow. Okay.
No, you have not. No, I'm going to remove the word challenges and replace it with the word opportunities.
Thank you.
I think it's fabulous. It is a wondrous and wonderful thing to be where things are real. However, there are technical accommodations you need to make. Most obviously about vocal projection, being audible and being visible, and being comfortable, so that people have to have places where they can sit, because we can stand and move around for hours, but they're not as exciting as us. So they need to be able to be in a comfortable place. The sun can't be in their eyes and they can't be in our eyes. You need to find a wall behind their heads so that your voice will echo back, or something of that nature. You need to know when the trains are coming past and when the noise level. All of those things are accommodated within the space. But that's just an accommodation within that space, because really, if you're telling it in a library or in a school, you're also going to be accommodating your technical skills for that space with a lot less fun, a lot less reward of what's available to you. So, yay.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. Whether indoor, outdoor, there are also all these consideration, and I thought the space that Joe mentioned is so important. Karen is here, and one time she was telling in an enclosed space and she had to be moved to another enclosed space where there was no ventilation. So as she was telling, she was sweating all over, and the kids were hot, and then they were fidgety. The good thing the officer saw all that, and then it changed. They changed the venue. So it's so important to look at the space, not just in terms of where even the weather. Yeah, and it does. Well, in Singapore, definitely it does affect our children, and in a cool environment, it does help. I was thinking of other areas also. I had this SALTS. I thought space. It's as not only that's that kind of proximity, also whether for children it's not too dark, not eerie, because that it happened to me once where the art piece happened to be in a very dark and eerie space, not suitable for children to walk in and out, and plus they had to walk past a exhibit that had these ghostly like figures. So then I told the museum officer, I said, no, you can't do this. You can't have us tell this story to children here. So it's so important, the space that we need to consider, the audience, who are they, how old are they, and are they mixed audience, or it makes a difference. Or if they're school children, I do find that it's easier. But if it's a mix with adults and different ages, okay, then the story, the way we engage needs to be different, and whether there's also space for them to do participatory kind of activity, storytelling, or movement. That kind of thing. And then the other thing I thought it was mentioned earlier was the link. The whatever story it is has to link to that object. It must make a strong link. And then time as well, the time of day, morning, afternoon, evening. That's so important, and the duration. Yeah, if you know, if it's half an hour or 45 minutes, whatever, we need to keep to that time. And then, of course, in this age, in this times, safety, social distancing, and masks, that kind of thing. I think that's so important right now because, you know, if we are making money through our job, we need to take care of ourselves. Our safety as well as the safety of the audience, yeah, is important.
Yeah. Having the objects around you can be a distraction. I remember a time I was brought in by the National Museum, and they had it was Greek statues. I think the Louvre was going through a remodeling, and so they've got all these wonderful Greek exhibits. And they brought me in. They said, "We want you to tell stories," and it was meant to be for secondary schools. And I said, "Oh, great! You know, all those Greek myths of incest and matricide and fratricide. Oh, wonderful! I can really wallow in all that stuff." And as I'm approaching, I'm going, and there's a father, and he's bringing, I should imagine she's like 4 or 5 years old. And of course, we're walking past these very anatomically correct male statues. And she says, "Oh, look, Daddy, that man's got a penis." And this poor guy's like, you know, oh my God, we're right here in the museum. And then when I met my group, they were all, you know, young primary. They weren't secondary at all. So all my stories had to go out, and I'm thinking, oh, you know, what do I know? Aesop, where can how do I tie this to the statues here? So it's really important, I think, that you communicate with whoever's bringing you into the museum to make sure that you are getting what you're expecting to get. Yes, Annabelle.
You brought to mind something. In the museum, we have an exhibition that is on Tierra del Fuego, the extreme south of South America. And the First Nations that live there, and they have lived there, they had some ceremonies in which they were, their body was covered with grease and paint, but nothing else. And we have a huge, gigantic image of 4 of them. It's a very famous picture taken in 1920. And we have it as part of the exhibition. And we usually stop there, and we have that as our background while we are guiding or doing storytelling. So we usually introduce the picture first. We usually introduce and we say, yes, you can see their penis are even painted, and you can see that they pulled out every hair in their body, but they are not exactly naked, and we go on and on and on with that. Only some schools hate that and they don't go to that exhibition, but it's part of the setting of the museum. Things like that, or things like, you know, we are competing sometimes with the attention of the works. There's this silver cover plate cape that is next to me in this picture, and they turned down the lights for the storytelling, so I had no lighting except inside the display case and one lateral light that was pointing to a picture. So I was like at the back of the wall having some light on my face, because if not, there was no lighting inside the exhibition except on the object. So that's part of what happens when you are inside a place. And visitors that come in and out, if you're telling inside the exhibition, which is part of the practice, and I love it. But as Joe says, you know, all of these you take into account, and as this SALT model that Sui Yin brought, you know, you have to consider all these factors. But it makes for a very fun and unique always telling.
Sure, I'm sure. Joe, you had a wonderful story about timing the critical moment with the ferry or something going past and blowing.
That was, yes, but just I was just thinking that when you're talking about distractions, when you're in a museum, you can be like, the advantage of being in a darkened space is you've got control, and you could do the hushed voice over a microphone and all sorts of things there. When you're outdoors, you can't have the trance, you can't be hypnotized, because there's, you know, stuff happening. Like, you cannot control the natural world, and many have tried and failed. And so but the thing is that you make it part, so then the story must be participative. You've got the interactions that are going on. We are moving, we're doing this. Oh, look at all this. So you tell so I'm telling the story as you move through, and then the bird came in and landed straight down, swooping down and calling out. And I said, and so my story pauses, and I go, and at that very moment, a bird appeared, and it continued, and you just lead it into the story as if I'd always intended it. And I've had people come, that sort of thing happen, and somebody come up to me and ask, how on earth did you manage to get the bird to come right at the right moment? Storytelling magic.
Absolutely. Well, I think on that story, Sheila, what I'd like to do, let's take perhaps the pins off, so perhaps we can see our audience, and if anybody has a question.
I can read it. It says, Anna says it's all about money. I agree. It might be a good idea to find sponsors and convince them instead of convincing the authorities. Do you have any experience with sponsored events in the museums? Or what motivates the sponsors? How and where can we find them?
So Joe's giving a very helpful, okay, yeah.
Anna's got something to say.
Anna, please, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't, I don't want to be sort of dismissive of the idea of sponsors specifically supporting storytelling, but I haven't myself encountered that in 28 years, I'm afraid. But what I would say is that what cultural institutions can do is make sure they build in storytelling as part of a program, a bigger program, and that is then often supported by grants, for example, in our country from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, more usually, or the Arts Council, or sponsors if it's a larger museum and there's a program accompanying a temporary exhibition. So I would be lobbying more for storytelling to be included as part of a program offer, which would then give more chance of it occurring in programs. And in those situations, you can have support from external sources.
Sure. I wonder, Joe, because you mentioned something about, I think it was a pub, if I remember correctly, or an area. And I'm just wondering whether that kind of, if you went to some heritage group that doesn't have quite the same, bureaucratic or administrative trappings, that they might be more open to exploring that.
I was really impressed with the imagination, that basically the grant givers showed. The project was like, we're in lockdown again now, but there was a long time when we weren't in lockdown. And so what the City of Sydney wanted to do was putting money into reanimating the City of Sydney, which had been so dead, like the city closed down when the suburbs were re-emerging. It was the last place for things to happen. So the City of Sydney Council was investing lots of money in supporting the businesses that weren't in operation. And they came up, I don't know who came up with it, I think it was the city grant, was for these 3 inner city bars that were in sort of laneways, and to get them to do some sort of public program to attract the audience. And what they did was connect with the Historic Houses Association to get some activities going on, some sort of lively interactions with people in a similar, I don't know if you're used to things like politics in the pub or philosophy in the pub, that sort of thing, but it was kind of storytelling. So they had one bar that was doing cabaret, and one that was doing murder mysteries, unsolved murder mysteries, and of course I was doing storytelling, and they knew me because I'd been doing guided tours for them, outdoor guided tours when everybody, you couldn't go indoors. We could still do tours outdoors. So they knew me there. And then they got, so the audience bought a ticket for 4 hours, and each time they'd spend 45 minutes in a bar, with an intermission, so they were going off and drinking, because that was the idea, to get the money into the business. And then, 45 minutes in, then they move on to the next one, so that they were cycling around, and they loved it. They just found it. They were saying, are we going to do this again? I've never been to anything like this before. This is so interesting, because it was cool, sophisticated, kind of horrible histories for grown-ups. It was a fun, quirky, but built on real history, on real things that had been happening in the laneways of Sydney for the last 200 years. So it was fun it was just great. And, they had the money from the City of Sydney to pay me, which was even better.
Very nice. Good, good.
To my question is with regard to crafting a story. Do you start with the history, the artifact, or do you start with a folk tale? I just want to pick your brain a bit. Sorry, but if I may, what is your starting point?
Yes.
I think since I'm thinking in several languages and translating, I picked some parts. So it depends. It always depends, because you can start a story from an object, and you start telling the history of the object or the cultural practices that made the object. But you can also start from a folktale. It's mostly what is your intention and what is the program or the session focused on. When I started storytelling, I was doing this guided tour in which I was speaking about the Maori people and speaking about their carving and their art. And then I started with a story. I pulled my story, my folktale, which had something that the Maori popo were doing. So when I finished the story, I said, okay, can you notice inside this exhibition something similar to what I said in the story? And that brought back the tour. But in some other places or in some other instances, it's just a session of stories that the object brings out. I confess that the Butsudan, for instance, brings me a story about Buddha against a whale, which is a Japanese story picked by Haviland Davis. So I brought that, and I brought some other stories that happened inside Buddhist temples in Japan to link them to the Buddhist altar. But it's always, in a sense, customized to what the session, exhibition, or focus is on. So first you have to, the same as when you're preparing a show, what do you want to achieve with this? What are your aims, your goals? And then you start thinking, perhaps the story is the switch for you, it's the start for you. But perhaps it's just, the object is so noticeable that opens up. I don't want to take too much time more. So my fellow panelists.
Can I add, or will have I been talking too much?
No, go on, Joe.
Yes, following on from that, from specific things. So just giving examples. When I was working in the Botanic Gardens, the Royal Botanic Gardens, Sydney, it was a weekly preschool program during term, and they'd have a theme each week, which was great because every week I had to come up with a story suitable for preschoolers that related to the theme, and they got fairly broad. So I would always start by looking through, my hundreds of books of folk tales to find a story that had the template that could relate to it. So I might change a folk tale about a water lily and make it a lotus because that's what was growing there, or what have you. And then, it'd be Tuesday morning and I have to deliver the story at Tuesday morning and I haven't got it. And I would go, what's the story I wish I'd found that would do the things that I want to do? And then I just make up a story there. if I was in, you can create if I'm doing it historically based and starting with something that did happen, and then I work out a legend from it, particularly if I'm doing ghost stories. So, some people go, oh, this is the event in this old building that we're looking at night, but I'd be just, I'd make it up because ghost stories, right? But a lot of the time I will be using stuff that again is a template that already exists, and then I will adjust it. But when I've got things like at one of the museums that was just a storage place, so it just had heaps and heaps of objects in display cases, which is dull, and they wanted me to create a program that interacted, or so I would be making up stories about each object and then trying to work out a theme that would connect them. I had one in an art gallery, and they'd had an artist who had just done a lot of sketches in his farmyard backyard. So there was a lot of the sketches that had a cow, and other ones would have the sheep, and other ones would have the dog. So I worked out used those as characters in a story and tried to work out a dog story. So I would go there, and then a sheep story that would go and follow some of them, and they would join together in the biggest picture so that I would have the climax. So yes, so examples of you take what you've got and you build on it.
Yeah, I agree. Isn't it wonderful that you can talk about tangible heritage with intangible heritage, which is, which are folk tales, and often like I was showing, you this, where I looked at the objects and I read more about it, and I had a feeling, hey, I like the anvil thing. Can I find a story about some blacksmith somewhere? and so I went to search for blacksmith. Of course, I did look for maybe barber, maybe something else, but somehow I was very drawn to the anvil, the blacksmith. And the more I got into it, the more I did find a kind of a blacksmith story, and then it had people, a community, and which was exactly what these artifacts were. It's about people in that community who were basket weavers, who were textile makers and jewelry makers, and I could weave all that into that story. So yeah, I drew upon a blacksmith story, and then spiced it up, add the salt and pepper and all kinds of spices, to make it a rich story that incorporated all the artifacts, as many as I could. Yeah.
So I was going to say, Joe said, take what you've worked with, what you've got. I was going to say, work with what you're given. I was doing something at the Jacob Ballas Children's Garden, and they just wanted stories with an ecological theme. They didn't say it had to be about the Jacob Ballas Garden per se. And I was going to tell a story about a K-pop tree. And when my liaison heard that, she said, "Oh, would you like to have? We've got K-pop pods, and also we've opened up the fluff and whatever." And I said, "Oh, that's fantastic! Yes, please, yes, please." And so that's how then my whole session began. Instead of beginning with the book and the story, I began with this and was able to talk very much. And we actually had samples that could be handed around. The kids could actually see and so on. So it's great if you have a good relationship with the person who's bringing you into the space, and that they see that you are open to their suggestions, that you can work with what they've got, or that you're open to that. I think that can also be very helpful too.
Yeah, so apologies for having to dash off, but thank you so much for inviting me to contribute to this. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been an excellent conversation. I suppose on this latest point, I think that it's about a relationship, a fairly democratic relationship actually, between the storyteller and the cultural institution, and working together in partnership about the content that's going to be delivered, with full respect on each side for each other. And as long as that dialogue is kept open and everyone's clear what the ultimate aim is, that then you'll get the content that's required.
Sure. Thanks very much, Anna. Well, listen, go off, have a good session, okay? And you know that if you're ever doing something online and you need Asian stories, then a feast is the place to come and find them. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, Anna.
Ciao. Ciao. I think we've had an excellent session, and I want to thank all the panelists for speaking so concisely and specifically. I think we've had lots of great examples, and I hope it's given people kind of ideas about ways that they could actually go and look for these kind of opportunities, because it's very clear that while perhaps in certain settings, certain communities or societies, there are people working at heritage sites who are really clued in and are aware of the potential of storytelling, that probably they are still perhaps in the minority, and that Joe's approach of just kind of, going straight there and saying, hello, who's the person in charge of, do you have storytelling here? Because I'm a storyteller, and kind of trying to educate them and opening that door yourself is probably a very good advice. Okay, and I presume that and I haven't discussed with my directors, my co-directors, but I'm assuming is that we're going to have the Feast Museum. Isn't that correct? Okay, we've got enough ancient artifacts
the prime exhibit.
Board. Okay, yeah. I just see me as a kind of animated figure, and or you can have my backdrop here and tell a story about that. Annabelle, I'm sure, would love to do that. And collecting stories. I'd love to have suggestions. What would you like to have in the Feast Storytelling Museum? So, for example, there could be the stone from Stone Soup, for example. That surely has a lot of stories there about that, or a magic lamp. I don't know. Send us a picture. You see, she's got her stone. There we go. Send us a picture of an object that you think should be in the Feast Museum of Stories. We could have fun with this, have we?
Your rain stick, Roger. I think at some stage all of us in Singapore have borrowed it. Yours and Sheila's, the two rain sticks.
Absolutely. Okay. So I think this could be a wonderful online archive of. What a great way, actually, because we'd have the picture of the object. We could suggest some stories, and then people who are looking,
We have our books. We have our books. Our feast books.
Okay, always the salesman.
Yeah, look at this. Mindy's out there promoting already. Very good and pretty. Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you. Can we give our panelists a big round for being such an entertaining and spontaneous and highly informative group of people. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for making my job so easy. And we look forward to seeing you next month